I'm finally starting to work on this traditional shepherd's hut. So I bought these cast iron wheels and axles in the UK as that's where this type of hut was originally developed in the 1500s, and they never really made it across to Europe, so the kits aren't available here. Getting all these bits over to France was far more challenging and slower than I'd thought. You may have seen that they broke the output shaft on my Land Rover and then nearly ripped the trailer in two on the drive over. But they're here now, and it means I can finally begin some real work. The back two wheels are 32 inches in diameter and weigh around 70 kilograms each, whereas the front two wheels are 24 inches and weigh maybe 40. Because they're smaller, they can turn under what will eventually be the oak rails which the hut will be built on top of, meaning that you can steer the hut in the direction that you need. The axles run the full width and are made of 50mm solid steel. Some kits you can buy have stub axles that you just mount onto the timbers. However, I'm sure they wouldn't last as long as these full length ones, and I want this hut to last as long as possible. The overall width is locked at 2 meters because of the threads that are cut on the axles, but the length can basically be as long as you want, within reason. I'm hoping to get somewhere between 5.5 and 6 meters, which is more than enough for a kitchen, a dining area, a fold-down bed, lots of storage, and maybe a wood stove, although if they're well insulated, they're not really needed, but obviously bring a certain charm to the space. I don't ever intend to live in the hut, but instead to shelter from the weather, cook food, and do work. The final resting place for this will be a new location that I'm very excited to show you later this year. The other important parts are these cast iron turntables. Again, there are cheaper steel options, but they wouldn't last as long nor look as handsome. These are designed to spin on each other, which enables the steering of the front axle. The final cast iron bits are these two brackets. They go upside down to how they're shown here, and they support the rear of the hut off the back axle. So my job is basically to fill everything in between, using a combination of reclaimed seasoned oak beams that sit on the axles and fresh green oak for the longer 6-meter rails. You can't buy seasoned oak from a sawmill, so you have to keep an eye out on various online marketplaces, waiting for a house demolition or something similar, and pounce when you see them come up because they don't tend to stick around. Fortunately, there were 4 extremely long 7-meter beams about an hour's drive away, and after checking them out and agreeing a price, we then had the question of transport. They were going to be far too long for my dad's trailer, but we did manage to find a 5-meter rental that could handle them.
Now we're going.
You want it a bit further up now?
Go. That's good. Let it roll, let it roll, let it roll. Perfect.
I'm going to the hospital.
You obey
Even with the longer trailer, they still overhung by a couple of meters, which was causing some weight problems. So I had to cut them shorter, but I did leave one long as it had 2 good ends, and it's kind of cool to have a 7-meter oak beam for whatever happens in the future. A big thank you to Michelle, who I bought the beams from, for helping us lift them onto the trailer, and for the wine, and a massive thank you to my parents for helping throughout.
I'm trying to get 125, which is there, by 175, which is there. So that's roughly what I'm after, which means any cracks like this aren't good.
Overall, the condition of the beams wasn't too bad, at least that's what I thought at the time. Some of the ends, which are more vulnerable, had split quite deeply, as you could see, so I tried to find a good 2 meter section to begin working on. It's not a simple thing to reuse seasoned oak beams. You have multiple issues to deal with, especially if the beam contains the heart of the tree, which as it dries, shrinks and causes deep cracks, often on more than one face. Cracks are ugly, but they're not normally a structural problem unless they're very close to the corners or if they run the full length. Another issue is weight and mass. You've really got to keep your wits about you when moving them about, and they're also tough, much tougher than green oak, and will blunt your saw blades twice as fast, meaning you really have to make sure the cut is worth it before you do it. I suppose the process isn't dissimilar to baking in that you put in a lot of work and you don't really know how it's going to end up until they're finished. To get going, you first need one good flat face. My preferred method is to set up a laser level and then take a power plane to get down to that line. Once you're on the line, you can use a small spirit level to make sure it's flat across the width. Then you can use this flat face to make a perfect 90-degree cut with a circular saw, but I didn't have a saw quite big enough. The final dimensions were going to be 125 by 175, and my Festool saw only cuts to 85, so it was time to upgrade. This big boy can cut 130, so could handle all of the 125 cuts and most of the 175 cuts. With the second face now 90 degrees to the first face, I could repeat the same process, but first I had to rip a piece of wood to attach to the saw. This board allowed me to cut exactly parallel from the opposite edge, and the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed a continuity error here. The first board I made wasn't quite big enough. Another issue you can run into with reclaimed beams are nails. There are few things quite as tempting as stumbling across a hammer, a tub of nails, and a big beam of wood. So often you'll find random nails in random locations in old beams, and hitting a nail is pretty much game over for whatever tool you're using. Fortunately, in this case, it was the chainsaw and not the brand new big saw, and I thought something like this might happen, so I brought backups. At this point, the beam was small enough to run through the thicknesser machine, which has a maximum depth of 140mm. The final face was the easiest, as the big saw could do the full cut in one pass, leaving a perfectly square seasoned oak beam. Sadly, that beam had quite a nasty split running the full length, so I ended up cutting a replacement which also had a nasty split on the edge, so I then had to cut another which turned out okay. Each one took a full day to cut down to size, so it was pretty slow going and quite frustrating. Once I'd cut the beams exactly at 2 meters, the final details were some nice little curve cuts that transformed the rather brutish look of the beams into something a little more refined. After using the big saw for the straight cut, I used the most expensive tool in the workshop to cut the curve. I'm very slowly making my money back on this tool. As you can see, the beams didn't quite fit the cast iron, but that is intentional. The cast iron sides are actually tapered at an angle to help them remove it from the mold after casting. To overcome this, I'll need to make some angled shims to fill this gap. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I built my website on Squarespace 2 years ago to sell tool belts, and more recently, the blue jacket you can see me wearing throughout this video. It's taught me loads about branding, product design, logistics, shipping, tax, all the nuts and bolts of business. What this boils down to is that Squarespace offers a vehicle to explore your own business ideas or creative endeavors. And if you have that itch in the back of your head, go to squarespace.com/Carl Rogers to build a free website with no experience needed. They have all the tools and templates you need to make it look professional, plus you'll receive 10% off if and when you decide to go live. See you soon for part 2.